I'm really happy to be here with all of you. It's a really important session tonight, isn't it, on Bin the Billionaires. Save the media. We need a people's-owned media, and we've got a fantastic discussion between Gary and Jeremy this evening, and then a panel discussion. But look, I've got a little confession to make with you before we start. My union, they got a stall in Tory party conference, and I've been inside. And I want to give you a little bit of feedback. They're very well organised, actually. I've been sneaking into the back of their fringe meetings, listening to what they got to say, and from an educational perspective, it's quite good. Labour Party are talking about strengthening Ofsted. I've been in a Conservative Party fringe meeting, sat at the back quietly, hoping I'm not being noticed, and they're talking about binning GCSEs. Well, that's good for our union. I'm really worried that we could be in a situation where the Conservative Party are moving to the left of Starmer's Labour on some key issues. But one thing they are not doing is they're not infighting. They're talking about retaining the red wall. I went to Labour Party conference and I didn't see nothing like that. I didn't see that level of organisation. But what they are also doing is they're attacking the left. They've decided to go on this internal war against us. And Jeremy Corbyn has been central to that. So we all need to stand in solidarity with Jeremy, and he should have his... Starmer needs to restore his whip. But what is interesting is you can definitely see the relationship between that party and the billionaire press. The billionaire press are all in there, they're all over it. So this tonight is a really important discussion about not only what's wrong with the media, but how we change it, how we win it for our side, because we need to. The stakes are so high, child poverty is rocketing, there's fire and rehire, precarious work, joblessness, hunger. So this is a really important start to that organisation. But that's enough from me. I'm going to welcome on our guests. So I would like to first introduce Gary Younge, Professor at Manchester University. You know him. He is a great man, a great journalist who has been on our side consistently. So welcome, Gary. And now, the man who does not need any introduction, Jeremy Corbyn!
Wow.
Well, there's a thing.
There's a thing, yes. Very, as you said, Jeremy, a very even-handed audience we have here. I want to start by asking you, if we go back to 2015 and your election, were you surprised, in retrospect, or even at the time, at how the media responded to you and your victory in the Labour Party you were trying to build?
Well, I never thought the media were going to welcome my election. I got that bit right, and they had been basically fairly hostile throughout the leadership election campaign. But interestingly, in the very early days when we decided to give it a tilt and try and become the candidate for leader in 2015, some of the media, including your paper at the time, said that I should be on the ballot paper so there could be a debate within the party. And so the media was then became fascinated by the bookies, and when I was put at 2000-1, they thought Corbyn was going for the leadership of the Labour Party, and he's got 2000-1 against him on it. One of my neighbours put some money on at that level, actually. He's been smiling ever since. The hostility then became worse towards the end of the campaign, and I was accused of fertilising the magic money tree because I opposed austerity, and people's quantitative easing was crazy, and so on and so on. You can imagine all the stuff. But interestingly, it was straight after the election, two things happened. One was, I said in my acceptance speech that the first thing I was going to do as leader of the party was to go outside and speak at the Refugees Are Welcome rally that was being held in Parliament Square. And they were pretty shocked and pretty horrified by this and said, this isn't what party leaders ought to do. And I said, well, get used to it, because that's the way it's going to be. And then 2 days later, there was this annual service in St Paul's Cathedral to commemorate the Blitz, 1940. And I went to the service, and as I came out, a group of people who were working for Costa Coffee came over and said, we'd love to give you a cup of coffee and a piece of cake. I said, that's really kind of you. And they were really insistent, and they were very nice about it. I said, fine. So I went over, duly drank a small cup of coffee and had a piece of cake. This wasn't to the liking of the Daily Mail, the Daily Express, the Daily Telegraph, the Sun, etc., who very rapidly announced that what I had done was stolen food from veterans who were denied coffee and cake because I'd been there and eaten it all. I mean, as you can see, I eat a great deal. And I then realised, my God, every single thing that I do, every single thing my family do from here on in, and from that time on, the house was under siege almost every single day. We had photographers and journalists hanging around outside, and to the extent that if I was at home, which would be quite rare, if I was at home for a day, I couldn't go out anyway. And so you're actually imprisoned in your own home as a result of it. So did I get used to it? No, you can't get used to that kind of unpleasantness. But it's not something that's ever bothered me, because I've also felt that, in a way, some of it was so vile and so nasty and so personal that it was actually counterproductive. I mean, I've never forgotten a lady in Newcastle saying to me, I asked her why she'd come to an event we were at, because she didn't seem particularly a Labour person, and she said, well, I heard you were evil. I said, okay, and what's the verdict? She said, I don't think you are. So I put that down as a result. Thank you, Daily Mail, for that one.
Oh, thank you. I didn't steal this. I'm intrigued by that last thing you said about some of it was counterproductive, because it did seem in 2017, if we're going to talk about the power of the media, that in 2017 you'd done everything apart from eat a baby, pretty much. And then came the result. And it seemed that somehow something else had penetrated that media blitz, that a message had broken through, or maybe their message didn't land. But I'm wondering what you think happened there.
Well, it's a number of things. I was just talking to Barry Gardner about this a minute ago. Is Barry still here, by the way? Okay. And we were talking about the campaign and what happened. I think the fundamental message that we got across from the very beginning of the leadership campaign in June 2015 was that we challenged the notion of austerity. We challenged the notion of impoverishing the poorest and the most vulnerable in order to pay off a debt that can't be paid off. And so that, in a sense, had got through to a lot of people. And then when we went into the election campaign, we were on 24%, I think, or something like that. And I just said, we're going to go out there, we're going to give it our all, we're going to do everything, we're going to go everywhere, we're going to mobilise people, we're going to get more young people registered to vote, we're going to grow the electorate, and above all, we'll have a manifesto that will be different to any other manifesto. And that we had. And Andrew Fisher, who was the prime author of it, obviously consulted with me all the way through the writing of it. But it was kind of a crazy time, because I was travelling all around the country on trains and buses and things, and trying to sign off bits of the manifesto by text message and things like this. And it was like 18, 20-hour days. And so if there were any mistakes in the manifesto, I obviously take the blame. But it was a very stressful period. But the fundamental message in the manifesto was, austerity's got to go. You've got to invest in young people for the future, and that we will be a government that will empower people through free education, free healthcare and social care, and we'll go on from there. So it was so radically different and so universally condemned by so much of the media. It became interesting. And I mean, I've canvassed in every election since 1966, and it is very rare on the doorstep for anybody to ask you anything about the manifesto. Most have never heard of it. And I went, obviously it was the launch in Bradford, then I did a lot of events in Yorkshire, then I went following day to my constituency, and I did a few streets. I knocked on doors, people said, oh Jeremy, can you get me a copy of the manifesto? It looks really interesting. Never heard that before. And so it caught on in a way that made a big difference, and that made us interesting. And the other interest in the story, and some of the better journalists picked it up, was that we were actually increasing in support throughout the campaign. So the news story was, I'm sorry we're getting feedback here, I'll try it this way. The interesting story was that the Theresa May campaign wasn't doing terribly well, and we were attracting massive crowds of people who were massively enthusiastic about the possibility of change. And so that was what was really exciting about it. But the other side of it was, I was being privately advised by an awful lot of people who one would loosely call on the right of the Labour Party, that this whole thing is useless. All you're doing is attracting the faithful. You're not winning anybody over. Well, we can relive that campaign forever, but we threw everything at it, and we got the highest Labour vote almost of this century. So I'm proud of that.
I'm wondering if we take the span from your original campaign to be leader to 2019, 2020, and you say at the beginning people were saying, well, Jeremy, he should be on the ballot so he can be part of the debate, not anticipating that you might actually win the debate and end up being the leader of the party. That, in a sense, they didn't take you seriously as a serious threat, and so it was like, I'll go on then. And that, I'm interested in your kind of view of this hypothesis, that up until 2017, they still didn't think you were going to do anything, and everybody said you weren't going to do anything, and then 2017 was a shock. But then the media, actually, after 2017, really did see you as a threat. Because the story doesn't end with that 2017 night. It ends electorally, kind of, in a more dismal place. And I'm wondering how you understand the media's role after 2017.
That's a very, very good point, Gary, and very appositely put, because it did change dramatically after the 2017 election. But if I may just go back slightly, there were a number of points during the 2017 election campaign that to me were crucial. One was the launch. Two was the mood that we managed to generate, and the manifesto launch, obviously. And then the third is what happened here in Manchester. It was awful, the bomb, awful. People died. It was wrong in every conceivable way what happened. And I was here in Manchester straight away. But I also said, and I'd made a speech about this the following week, that we had to reflect on our activities as a country in the war on terror and what we've been doing around the world. And so we thought about that a great deal, particularly Seamus Milne and myself and others, thought about it a great deal and decided that at the end of the campaign suspension, that was on 4 or 5 days later, I would make this reflective speech on our foreign policy and why I would not lead a government that would go into illegal wars and would not have a very different foreign policy, and made this speech.
You made a speech and thinking, oh my God, I don't know how this is going to go.
I mean, I was thinking the same, actually. So as I'm making this speech, I'm seeing this puzzled look on the face of lots of journalists and others, thinking. And then, as I expected, as soon as I stepped off the stage and left, we then clicked on, as you do, to all the sort of live stream, social media and so on, unbelievable torrents of abuse of me. And then something quite interesting happened. About 2 hours, 3 hours, maybe 3 hours later, YouGov did a telephone poll, and it was around 60% of the people asked said, Corbyn's on the right lines here. At last there's somebody sensible and serious about how we deal with these things. And after that moment, hardly another word was said. But the effect on the, want of a better term, foreign policy lobby in this country was massive. And after the 2017 election, there was an avalanche of attacks and abuse against us, against the party, against me individually, against my family and all my closest associates. And the people that got that worst were Diane Abbott and John McDonnell, who got it worst. And the only way around that is communications with the people that we want to get a message through to and want to listen to. And that is the whole point of our discussion this evening. If we rely on the, I use the word very loosely, moderation of the mainstream media to decide what our message should be, then we're not going to get that message through. I've been this afternoon at the Working Class Library in Salford. Wonderful, fascinating place. Please join it, please support it. It's a very precious gem in the Labour movement's history and place. And there, I'm reading early leaflets and newspapers of late 18th, early 19th century, all the attempts at communication of working class communities. And you look all over the world of people in struggle, they always sought a form of communication. Those that managed to be freed or escape from slavery in the southern states of the USA, what was the first thing they did? Set up newspapers that others might get that message, and their newspaper offices were often burnt down by the slave owners and others. The struggle to get our message across all over the world is a key one. Now, things are obviously very, very different now because we've got the electronic forms of communication, and they are huge, and back to our leadership and election campaigns, we used those to the maximum advantage to bypass some of the stuff in the mainstream media. But I tell you, the ability of the mainstream media to turn somebody into something evil is actually quite considerable. And I'm very grateful for the number of people that haven't called me evil as I travel around the country, and the number of people that actually see through all this. And so it's been an object lesson. But the avalanche that came up against us from 17 onwards, and particularly after Glastonbury in July 2017, which was an amazing experience. And being able to quote Shelley at Glastonbury is something I'll always treasure. It changed, and it became relentless, full-on, 24/7. And I know for many of you here it was probably an incredibly frustrating experience, but the work done by our press team in batting off some of the more crazy stories was legion. But there was this whole thing that the policies we were putting forward on austerity, on foreign policy, on social justice, and redistribution of wealth and power totally freaked out the wealthy and the powerful. And you know what? They really love their tax havens, and they don't like people messing with their tax havens.
Among the wealthiest and the most venal are those who own the Googles, the Facebooks, the Twitters, and so on. If we are going to rely on those platforms for communication, then we are going to be sunk, aren't we? I mean, how do we bypass a different set of gatekeepers who make it look open, but actually it's not?
They do make it look. They do make it look open, and you're right, it's not. Well, for the moment, Facebook's closed down anyway. I don't know if it's come back on, but apparently there's some glitch going on. I don't know what the glitch is. I don't know who caused it. I don't know what the problem is, but I'm pretty sure within a few hours it'll be the Russians in some way or the other. You know, I don't know, but I'm just thinking that some of our more perceptive media may have come to that conclusion already. But they are incredibly powerful. And every single one of us in this marquee uses them. And they also are a major news source for all the other news sources. So you look at Google, Amazon, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, etc., etc. In reality, they're owned by two groups, and they're very, very powerful. And they do and will and can shut down people that are difficult. They shut down the Indian farmers at an absolutely crucial point in their demonstration in New Delhi when they were trying to force back against essentially free market agricultural policy which the Modi government, Narendra Modi's government, is trying to force on them. So they had no form of communication. So what did they do? They invented a newspaper. They printed a newspaper of their own. But quite clearly, you can only get a newspaper out amongst the 100,000 people that are there. You couldn't get it out all over India. And so the power is absolutely massive. They close down or limit or control or put in algorithms to control and direct people in every country and every society, and they will go along with repressive regimes. They'll go along with anybody in order to fit in. It's very, very powerful. And so we've got to think this thing through. The technology, in a sense, is neutral, in the sense that we can all develop technology and answers and ideas. It's the control of it that is not neutral. And so I'm being busy setting up local news clubs around the country through the Peace and Justice Project, and also encouraging the growth of alternative media. You think Navarro, Double Down News, The Canary, so many others, Byline and many others that are very good. They need to come together. They need to come together with a common voice. We need to have that ability to live stream to our community in this country and around the world. And at its best, this can be a very, very powerful message. I mean, I did a meeting with a group of people in Brazil a couple of months ago, 3 months ago, and there were 200,000 people at the meeting. And that was all online, all over the place. And when we launched the Project for Justice and Peace, we got hundreds of thousands online all around the world. And so it's not as if there isn't a thirst for that alternative, it's just not so easily accessible. So all of our unions are looking in that direction. The CWU is probably the most effective at communicating with its own members through social media and so on. Unite are looking at doing their own TV and so on. We've got to develop the alternative. In the 19th, 20th century, the labour movement developed the New Leader, developed the Daily Herald, developed Reynolds News and the Morning Star, or Daily Worker as it was, and then Morning Star, and so many others. I probably agree with it, but I can't read the title of that.
The Word, you've written for us, Jeremy.
Oh, The Word, sorry, I couldn't read the title. Thank you. No, thank you, I just couldn't read it, that was all. And so that has been the object lesson, and so it is about now getting into electronic media, and that is what's so crucial. So the big lesson I would give you, if I may be so patronising as to say so, is that 5 years of media attacks taught me they're very effective, they're very powerful, and they're totally relentless. Totally relentless. And it's very hard to believe how stupid some of the stories are. I didn't know that my great-great-uncle, 3 removed, through his second cousin, married to somebody else, apparently, but the name isn't known, ran a workhouse in Gloucester.
You're evil, Jeremy.
I never heard of this person, nothing about them. You know, and this was a serious story in a newspaper, or supposedly serious. That is the level that they will sink to. So it is us to win the argument. You're here with the People's Assembly. People's Assembly, please support them. Fantastic work they've done. We've got to improve our communications.
I was in America when Obama was elected, and people called him the first black president, and somebody said, "You're assuming that there's going to be a second anytime soon. You shouldn't do that." Assuming that we might not get a left leader very soon, the Labour Party, we have to learn the lessons, whatever lessons there are. Is there anything that you would have done differently with the benefit of hindsight after those 4 years?
Well, I'm writing a book about it at the moment, and I haven't got to that chapter yet. But let me put it this way.
I mean,
with the media, we tried to engage with the mainstream media, and we spent an awful lot of time preparing and prepping for all kinds of interviews, channels, and so on and so on. And you have to do that. You can't necessarily avoid that. But to some extent, you kind of then overemphasize the sense of news values that they have and the way in which they put things. Hindsight is very helpful and very valuable. I think I would put more energy and effort into developing a serious alternative news sources for our movement and around the country. But it was a very difficult time in 2015 because we'd won the leadership of the Labour Party. What we hadn't done was won the sympathies or support of quite a lot of the parliamentary Labour Party. You might have noticed that. And various other quite important forces. And so it is about all of us who want to see a different set of values running our lives. Values of social justice, values of anti-racism, values of peace, values of human rights, of making sure we're active all the time. And the other thing I'd say, which I worked very hard to get, but it was a big struggle, was to turn the Labour Party into a community party and community organising, so that we as a movement are active all the time. Now, you're here because you're activists and because you do good things and good stuff, I'm assuming. You know as well as I do that if you're with people in their community on the good days and the bad days, the days you don't win the struggle to keep the school, to keep the hospital, keep the A&E, if you're there on those days and you're there on the days that you win, when you save the A&E, you develop a new park, you develop a new nursery, or whatever your campaign is, you're politically earning the space to talk about wider and bigger issues. If you're not there and you only turn up well-dressed and well-suited 3 weeks before an election, it's not the same. It is about mobilising people. The right rely on ignorance, inaction and apathy. We rely on information, enthusiasm and activism. Sometimes hard, sometimes difficult, sometimes involves lots of sacrifices. But think of the sacrifices that were made long before any of us in this marquee were born to build our Labour movement. They're the people I look up to.
My last question, which is that...
Oh, only one more?
Just one more. I know. I could go on all night, Jeremy, but... There were the policies on austerity, on wealth distribution, redistribution, and so on. There was broadband communism, obviously. But there was also a media plan. There was also a specific agenda to deal with some of the things that we've been talking about here, and I wonder if you could just kind of run through some of that with us.
Yeah, thanks, Gary. Obviously, we were thinking very hard and trying to learn lessons on this about how we would change the way the media operates and how we would empower an independent media. Now, this might, some of you here might think, well, I'm actually very anti-media, anti-journalist and all the rest of it. I'm not. I'm actually a member of the National Union of Journalists, and I've got nothing but admiration for great journalists around the world. I'm thinking my friend Annabel Hernandez from Mexico, who has risked all to write books about corruption, the drug trade and the cartels and everything else, and has to live with 24/7 security just to stay alive as a result of her work. But those are journalists I admire, like those in prison in Egypt at the present time, or those in prison in other countries. I have nothing but admiration for them. So mine is not anti-journalist or anti-favour of genuinely independent journalism. I'm also in favour of democracy in the running of newspapers. If Gary, I'm sure, won't mind me just referring to a conversation he and I just had before we came on the stage. We're talking about the role of papers in asking questions. A newspaper should be asking the difficult questions of power, of authority, of big business. That means having editors that have got the ability to do that and the support of their team in doing so. Why can't the editors of newspapers be elected by people within the newspaper itself? That would be a very interesting part of democracy. Also, taking a taxation on the big companies, Google, Facebook, etc., in order to help support local independent media so that we do value our local newspapers, and that we also have the right of reply in our newspapers, and we limit the extent to which the individual owner can control both broadcast and print media. There was a time, up till about 20 years ago, that you could say there was a fundamental difference between print media and broadcast media. There isn't now, because almost every print media in effect runs almost a TV channel. Even radio programs basically run TV channels, and that level of ownership is often much the same. And that brings with it not censorship. I'm not saying there's censorship. It brings self-censorship by those that work for those organisations on the news values, what they'll report, the stories they'll pursue, and it also brings with it a global thought process as well. I mean, I guess all of us here watch quite a bit of television at different times. I'm always astonished at how little most of the TV media in this country report on Africa, Latin America, most of South Asia and the Caribbean, and how they obsessively report on the United States and to some extent on Western Europe, and how when something awful happens, there's a sort of subliminal denigration of poor working class communities compared to the effects of crime and disorder on wealthier middle class communities. There's a class element in the way in which so much of our media is run. And so it is about all of that. And so I'd say please join the campaign Bin the Billionaires. Now, I haven't watched GB News consciously, partly because I couldn't work out how to find it on my television, but also
Nobody's watched GB News.
I've got to fess up here. I'm in the gym the other day. I'm doing my running. I'm doing well, going fast, and I'm very pleased with myself. In fact, I look up, and there's this channel showing on the television. Don't recognise those people, don't know who they are. And it comes up, it's damn GB News. I have watched it. I'm sorry. I won't do it again.
I think you probably doubled their viewership at that time. We are sadly out of time. We're about to move into a panel discussion. I want to thank Jeremy, the man who stole sandwiches and got us out. Thanks for Jeremy.
Give it up for Gary Younge and Jeremy Corbyn! Okay, I hear there's queues outside, so if you've not got a ticket, I'm sure we'll make room for you, but try and squeeze in and just be mindful. If you've not subscribed to the People's Assembly's Patreon Fund a Fight, please do. These things cost money. It costs money to organise. There is a gentleman collecting donations at the back. There we go. Yeah, we got sound on the live streams.